Good morning and welcome to the Fire in the Belly, the boardroom series. And we have the outstanding Pat Slattery on again with us this morning. So welcome back, Pat.
Good morning, Pete. Great to be here.
Listen, it's outstanding to have you on. Thank you so much on this Mature Reflection series. And today's topic has been chosen by yourself for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And we're talking about failure today. So tell us, Pat, what is failure?
Yeah, I mean, look, failure, in my opinion, and again, what I'm going to share here with you guys is just my opinion, and my opinion based on experience and being in the personal growth industry for 26 plus years, right? And I'm going to share some of my experiences and my opinions. And again, I'm going to try and explain it in a more simplistic way, that maybe people can take sense of it, and hopefully I'll translate that in that way for you guys. So. But failure, I mean, like there's many aspects to failure. So there's a couple of things I'm going to cover in the talk. One is what is failure, then why should failure actually be an option, and why you should accept failure, and then also we're going to discuss when failure should not be an option. But to start off, Pete, I think most people I've met, and I just thought about this as we're coming on, and I made a notice. Most people I met feel to me that anything they ever failed in is because of somebody else. Right, it's never got anything to do with them. It's somebody else or something else that didn't work out. And once we understand that, I guess when we look at failure and what it is and how it affects people's lives and how it affects people's beliefs and behaviors, and I think it's about time for people to take ownership. And taking ownership of your own failures means that you don't let your ego get in the way, right? So we got to get the ego out of it here and understand why failure is important. And and again, when people hear me talk about failure, because for me, I always say to people, there is no such thing as failure. It's feedback. Okay, so but I'll elaborate a little bit more into this, and hopefully we get an understanding. But again, when we start looking at the different definitions of failure, now when I picked this topic, it was just I think I reached out to you and I said, listen, I think we'll cover failure, and then of course, this morning I couldn't remember why I chose failure, right? But I think it's particularly right now with what's going on in the world right now, and I believe for me it's the amount of conversations I've been having with people who are talking about failure and how they're feeling like failures. So when we look at the definition of failure, there are different ways of explaining it. I suppose one is an act or an instance of failing or proving unsuccessful, which creates a lack of success. So you might hear people say that their effort ended in failure or the campaign was a failure. Now, when I looked at this definition, something that really jumped up at me is when did we get taught about failure? And when I've looked back and had a bit of reflection on my own life too, and I think about the things that I've overcame and why did I keep going? And the reality is I didn't really recognize failure. I didn't know I was failing. I certainly was in certain areas and parts of my life, but I didn't know it, so I just kept going. And for some reason, when we look at that definition about somebody's effort ending in failure, I remember growing up as a kid playing rugby, a young kid underage, and this has just come to me, so I'd like to share it with people. Maybe it'll resonate with some people here. But we had a magnificent coach. He was as mad as a box of frogs, right? But he was a great coach, a guy called Liam Fitzgerald, and Fitzgerald Park, which is the home of my rugby team that I played rugby with, is called after him. But I remember, we were on the pitch and everybody played their heart out as young kids and on, 8, 9, 10-year old. And we played our hearts out. And sometimes we didn't win every single match. But one thing was resonated with us, we all heard great effort, great effort. We heard that term dozens and dozens of times, both from us and from our opposing sides. And we heard the coaches on the sideline saying, great effort, keep going, give it a go again, great effort. And I think what people need to understand is as you're moving forward and you're moving towards success, whatever success means to you, and if you find yourself failing, you see it as another great effort, maybe, right? Say it's a great effort, and then we keep going. So that's just something that resonated with me, and I wanted to share with you guys. But again, when we look at the definitions, we can look at non-performance or something that was due or required or expected by somebody. So in this case, some people might say it was a failure to do what you have promised or a failure to appear or deliver, then we could look at failure in terms of quantity or quality or insufficiency. So if you have a failure of crops, if you didn't get good crops, you went off and you sowed your seeds and you working throughout the winter or throughout the summer, and autumn comes and you don't get good crops, you can say, okay, well, the quantity, I didn't get enough, or I didn't get good enough crops. So you can start looking at all the different definitions there. Or, from some people will say a person was a failure in their career, right? Or what they made isn't that great. So when we start understanding this, we have to start thinking about what creates that train of thought around failure. And and again, to get an understanding of it, because failure again it's a state, or it's a condition of not meeting your desired outcome, right? Or maybe viewed as the opposite of success. Because when most people are looking at failure, they're comparing it to somebody else that's successful and living in that world of comparisons again. So we have to move away from the comparisons and understand what it truly means for us. Now, again, the criteria for failure just completely depends on the context, and it may be relative to one person, or it might be relative to a belief system. Okay, now one person might consider something a failure while another person considers a success. So, particularly in cases of direct competition, you see, here's we're back to people who feel they're in direct competition with people, and they're living by comparisons, and they're starting to compare themselves to somebody who appears more successful, and that person who might appear more successful is probably dissatisfied and thinks they haven't failed because they've set larger goals. So it just completely depends on where you're position yourself, because for one person what may appear to be a failure could be considered a success by somebody else. So, again, is it a belief system? Is it what we've been taught? And we'll touch on this as I go through this talk here, and maybe see if we can elaborate a little bit more and open people's train of thought around failure. But I know for many people, and I think I shared this with you before, Peter, was an article I done quite a while back, and where we think about how many people have started out in life hearing the words from peers, or parents, or professionals, even in the professional world, that failure is bad. And and I know this has been discussed hundreds of times, that schools around the world are predominantly running a pass-fail system. So if you think about how failure is I suppose identified, is it not a judgment then placed on you by other people? So if you feel you're failing in something, is that not a judgment placed on you by others? Now, because usually it is the perception of what people think, right? It's what people think to stop people from moving forward, or what will people think of me if I fail, or when I do fail, if you recognize it a failure, is it the fear of what people might say? And of course, in some cases, some people do say it, right? Some people don't know when they have two ears and one mouth, and they tend to speak out loud, and they share their thoughts with you, which may not necessarily be the truth. So, when you understand that, if you feel that a failure is a judgment just placed on you by others, then if that's the case, then this judgment that you pass on, that they pass on you, in truth, is actually none of your business, right? And I'm going to touch more into this judgment game a little bit later on the talk as well, and I'll give you my explanation on that, and maybe it's a little tool that you guys can take away and use and make a change. So, again, it's all down to how you interpret the result. So just because somebody else thinks you're a failure, just because somebody else thinks somebody else is a failure, really and truly has nothing to do with them. It's none of your business. So don't fall into their belief systems or what their belief of failure is. Now, so if you're making progress, you got to keep asking yourself, as long as you're making progress, is it a failure? And for most people, if you've got to keep making progress, you've got to keep stepping up so you don't create a failure. Now, again, we could go back and ask, we've all heard the story thousands of times, I'm sure, about Thomas Edison. After conducting thousands of experiments to invent a light bulb with no success, somebody asked him, why did you not give up, as you failed so many times? And Edison was reported to reply, I haven't failed. I've learned 1,000 ways how not to invent a light bulb. Again, it's all comes down to how you look at it. Excuse me. So it all comes down to how you look at it. So again, in my opinion, there is only one failure, and that's the failure to participate or to quit. You've got to always aim to give 100%. By doing this, it ensures that you will maximize your learning along the way to your goal, target, or your dream, whatever it is that you want. Participation requires you, by the way, to apply yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. So this means you're giving it your all, you're getting involved. And if you get involved, failure can't be an option, which we will touch on again. Because once you get involved and you require yourself and you apply yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and it hardwires you, I suppose, it hardwires your nervous system and deepens your learning by making it faster and more effective. Sometimes you discover that experience, what this does when you experience failure, but when you experience failure and recognize it for what it is, it's an opportunity for you to get more involved, to be able to step up, to not quit. And once you do this and you apply this knowledge, this information, this is what all of a sudden things start to work in your favor, right? Things start to happen, and they start happening more effectively, and they start happening faster. I think I shared a story with you before where I had met with a client and the topic of failure had come up, and this client became argumentative, right? This client, he didn't believe in failure, right? To him, failure implied that he was a loser. And this is what for most people, I mean, people think about failure, they imply that they're a loser. So when I asked, had he ever failed at anything, he admitted that he had. So the next question I asked him is if he had learned anything from that failure, and he grudgingly admitted that he had. And the other thing is I had to ask him is had it helped him move towards success? Now, when I asked him this question, it was like he had a revelation. And he said, so long as one can learn and apply learning to move forward from any failure, then it's a success. So no matter what the situation is, if you give it your all and you learn something, then you have succeeded. That means you're a winner. You will always win. So when we think about failure, we have to think now of a new definition of failure. And what does failure mean? So I'm going to share with you my definition for failure. It's focused and insightful learning using real experience. Now I know we've touched on this, I think, before in a previous talk. So you got to ask yourself, what must happen for you to feel success? And then focus on that repeatedly. So why should failure be an option? If we were to think of why should failure be an option, and I've just written down these notes, these are the questions I'm going to ask, because these are the questions that have kind of come up and I've paid attention to what people are asking. So I think what you need to realize is success might always be glorified, but failure is exemplified, right? Failure teaches more lessons than success does. And it's all wonderful to look successful and become successful. And my wish for everybody is that they become successful. But I want you to understand that your failures will teach you more lessons than success will. And when we get to understand this and we start realizing what's going on, you start to realize that people don't fail. Now, if you're watching this, I really want you to pay attention to this. I really want you to take this on board. People don't fail. Ideas fail. It's the ideas that people have fail, simply due to lack of proper execution, lack of sufficient resources or competent leadership, lack of revenue, or maybe the model has not been accepted, or maybe it's a lack of a plan. But people don't fail. Ideas fail. Now, when we understand this, we have to ask ourselves the next question that comes up is, why should we accept failure? So most people go, it's, why should I accept failure? It's unfair. Always seems to happen to me, right? I think I get the short end of the stick. I've heard this so many times. It's unfair. Always seem to fail, right? So imagine if we didn't go through failures. Imagine what the world would be like if we had free homes, free houses, free food. You didn't have to work. And you could get up every single morning where you know that absolutely the whole world, for everybody, where you know that nothing can actually go wrong. Now, I know some people say, God, that's my dream. I'd love that. But really, would you? Right? Because if we lived in a world like that, what do you think would happen? Given our nature, we probably would take it for granted. Right? We'd never respect anyone or anything. And the results potentially could be that the world could end up as unhealthy couch potatoes and living under the delusion that we're superhuman beings. So why should we accept failure? So a number of reasons we should accept failure is we get a reality check. We've never failed at anything. You feel invincible. Failure will give you a reality check, just like a storm or earthquakes or tsunamis, which remind us that you don't have control over everything. And sometimes when I see people who appear to have a feeling of lack of control, or they've lost control over things, that's when they start feeling like a failure. So we need that reality check and just realize this is what it is. This is why we should accept failure. The other another reason, I guess, is that it teaches us the value of everything. So failure teaches us the value of everything. Now, I know from my experience, and I again have been speaking to a lot of people, after people have lost a loved one, they tend to value them more and realize how much that they meant or maybe did for you. So, an understanding what failure does and teaching us the value, I think people value people, money, their homes, relationships more so only after they've lost them. Another area is it teaches us how to survive. This to me is, you know, I think even when I say survive, it's probably I probably mean survive, but I also mean thrive. Because when I talk about my failures in my past and when I share the things that were going wrong that I didn't recognize as failures because during on my journey, and I was challenged quite a lot. And people said to me, "How did you keep going?" It's simply because I said I couldn't. I to me, I grew up surviving. My whole life is about surviving, and because I was in that mindset of surviving, I didn't recognize a failure as a failure. I just saw it as something else that had to get done. Now, sometimes when you understand about failure, you got to think about how it teaches us to survive, right? So you remember the first day you were taught to swim, if you can't swim, right? Now, the first day you were taught to swim, if you're like me, chances are you were just pushed into the water, right? And then you push in the water, you probably started frantically moving, kicking your legs and your hands and splashing and doing everything to survive, not knowing all along that you could have just stood up in the shallow water and you may not ever have drowned, right? Unless you're put in the deep end, you won't know that you can survive. Right. So I remember my brother, literally, we used to swim in the river. And I remember him, I distinctly remember him, and we were kids, and he catches us by the arms and did a big swing and then fling us off the bank into the river. And then we had to survive. We swam, right? Because failure couldn't be an option, right? So the other thing it teaches is how do we learn from our mistakes? Right. Again, when you were riding a bike, when you were learning how to ride a bike, you were probably told not to speed. Don't speed up, take your time, go careful. But we sped anyway, right? Until we fell and hurt ourselves. Then and only then did we understand why our parents told us not to. And in life, unless we make mistakes ourselves, we never really learn. So we got to learn from our mistakes, and we have to make those mistakes ourselves. Another area is maybe, is this a new opportunity? Now, you've all heard the saying, every cloud is a silver lining, right? So when we fail, we also have an opportunity to start new. So if you fail, you have an opportunity to start again, to start over. Now, we don't necessarily see what's good about failure immediately, right? But that it gives an opportunity to hit the restart button and to think about new possibilities is, to me, it's like lighting that spark again. Right? You're talking about your fire in the belly. It's lighting that spark again. It's actually seeing where the opportunity is. Now, again, you won't see it immediately. You probably won't feel it, but you got to be able to step outside of it, because again, it's back to, if things don't happen in the way you wanted them to happen, the way you wanted them, maybe it's not in your control. So you have to get back and get focused on what is within your control. And so you have to take that time out in order for you to realize that that failure could be a great opportunity. Right now, in these current times, we have met so many people who saw, back in March, that in their mindset, when we started working with them, were thinking that, they're going to fail. They're going to fail in life. They're going to fail their family. They're going to fail, they're going to fail their bills. They're going to fail, and all of a sudden, because we created a different way of thinking, all of a sudden they've realized there's a whole new opportunity and hit the restarting button and thinking about new possibilities. And they're using those new possibilities to create that dream, that thing that they actually wanted. So failure in this case was good. Another thing we can learn from is courage. Now, it takes a lot to deal with failure and to get back up. So failure teaches you to be courageous. When you have nothing more to lose, you have a lot to gain. And I think it was Kyle Wilson, and we were doing a talk with Kyle Wilson, when he said, everybody starts at zero. And sometimes you might find yourself back there when you don't want to be back there. You may not have a desire to be back there, but you may find yourself back there. But if you understand, if you get to that point of zero, the point of not having any more, and you realize that you have nothing more to lose, then you've got a lot to gain. So failure is going to teach you to be courageous. Again, a great quote from the Rocky movies, Sylvester Stallone. And I love it. I love it. And I love this quote, actually. And I remember him talking to the son, and this quote has come up so many times in conversation, and I just find it so inspiring. And he says, our greatest glory is not in falling, but rising every time we fall. So our greatest glory is not in falling, but rising every time we fall. So what else do we learn from failures? We find our inner strength. Sometimes when you feel like giving up and nothing seems to work for you, you have to dig deep. You have to find that inner strength and keep pushing forward. And it gets you through the worst of times. And there's a great quote by Vivian Green that says, life is not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning how to dance in the rain. So you're going to find that inner strength, and you're going to keep pushing forward. And that's what it teaches us. Another thing it does, it helps us cultivate a positive attitude. When you have a setback, either you drown into being negative, or you create a positive attitude. And there's a great Indian actress, Katrina Kaif, I believe her name is pronounced, who says, I have a very positive attitude in life. My insecurity, fear, and need to know about tomorrows have fortunately eased. What is going to happen will happen anyway, so why break my head over it? If it's not in your control and it's going to happen, just let it happen. Go through it. It's back to what we discussed, having those experiences, going through the experience. Don't beat yourself up. Just go through it. Then it's not a failure. You will learn to keep yourself motivated, and you should keep yourself motivated. Now, as hard as it might be, in order to keep yourself motivated, sometimes you have to surround yourself with people that motivate you. Mm-hmm. You know, from the things that when you're going or experiencing failure or feeling it, I think the importance of listening to or reading motivational speeches or quotes, just like some of we've shared here, or some of the videos like we're doing here, or audio, whatever it is you like, but you don't stop trying. You don't stop trying. You got to keep yourself motivated. You got to keep going.
It's so, I'm really struck at how powerful it is. You know, I mean, there's power in failure, but it all depends on the energy you attach to it.
You see, you know, the truth is, it's always up to you. There's absolutely nobody in the world, absolutely, in my opinion, nobody can determine whether you're a failure or a success other than you. And your definition of success or failure is going to be different to mine, and probably to everybody else too. And if you recognize it, it depends on how much energy you bring to it. And, you know, do you bring energy to that learning that new opportunity and stepping up, motivating yourself? Or do you bring energy to the failure? And wherever you bring the energy to, that's what's going to come about, right? Because whatever energy you're bringing movement towards that thing that you probably don't want. That's why I'm sure even in a previous talk we done, when we talked about, you know, sometimes we have to understand that, you know, if you don't keep looking for the things that you want, the things that you don't want usually turn up. Right? So be careful what you ask for. And if you keep recognizing failure keeps waving his hands and say, yeah, that's me, I'm here. Right? But so does success, whatever success means to you. but you got to keep yourself motivated. You don't stop trying. Uh, trying to remember this pronunciation of this name is Rabindranath Tagore once said, "You can't cross the sea merely by standing and staring at the water." Right? So you don't stop trying. You keep going. You do whatever it takes. Now, the other thing you got to be is fearless. Don't be afraid to fail. When you embrace failure, I would truly believe you're actually on the path to success. And again, you all know Elon Musk. He said, "A failure is not an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough." Now, think about that. Failure is not an option, but if things are not failing, you're not innovating enough. Failure is when you quit. Failure is when you stop. Failing is the journey, is the lessons on the way. And if things are not failing, you're not innovating enough because you already know the answer. Think about it. You think you're a superhuman being if you haven't failed and you're not learning any lessons. And we're going to learn what's really important. What's really important. And then you got to learn what you need to do in order to keep moving towards those things that you want. So if we were to think about when failure is not an option. So now this for me, this is possibly the most important part for me when I think about failure, because you hear me saying that failure is not an option. I've said it not in quotes and not on stage. I've said it from myself many times in my life or in my business. Many times that failure is not an option. So when failure, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, is it that it's not a failure, or that the price is so big it's unacceptable?
When I say again, that's your interpretation of the price being so big. It might be a different interpretation for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, again, people judging failure are just based on other people's opinions. And and when we understand that, it really doesn't matter what other people think. What matters is what you think. And if you see something that you really want and truly want to have, you will do whatever it takes to get there. You will do whatever it takes. You will get there. You will create that success because it's important to you. Now, think about this, Pete, because right now I know some people who are actually going back, resitting their leaving certs because they're dissatisfied with the results they came, right? Which was, I suppose, unfair, right? But it's something that people had no control over. And I also know of people who are being forced to sit their leaving certs because somebody else saw it as a failure. And they're told that they can't follow their dream, or they can't follow somebody else's dream for them. Usually I found as people get older in life, there's not that many that are in the position of following the dream that they would have chosen. It's usually something that people thought, in order to be successful, you have to do this, etc., etc., etc. And you can't fail your exams, or you will amount to nothing, or you won't achieve very much. And, so we gotta, so when we start looking at that, you say, well, how important it is to you? Because I can tell you this, in my opinion, it doesn't matter how much you study. If it's not important to you, you're not going to bring your A game. But when it is important to you, you will bring your A game. You'll keep trying. You'll keep doing whatever it takes. So when failure is not an option, what do you do? Or how do you recognize it when it's not an option? Well, for me, it's when you use the power of failure as a motivating source and a motivating force for success. Now, again, I remind you of that when you use the power of failure as a motivating source and a motivating force for success. Failure is not an option then. When you recognize that failure is a better teacher than success, then failure is not an option. When you choose success as your only option, then failure is not an option. Now, this does not mean that you will have perfect days and 100% of perfect moments. That's just failing. And that's okay. But if you choose it as your only option, you will overcome any failings that you may be going through or experiencing. The other time when failure is not an option, and this one I really, really hope that people take on board, is when you choose to stop giving power to other people. Most people have this fear of what will people think of me if it doesn't work out. So you've got to stop giving power to other people. This is completely within your control. It may frustrate you at times. There may be things you have to overcome, but that's just part of it. When you choose to stop driving that JCB, and for people who have never heard this, I know I probably shared this with you before, Pete. So I'm going to talk about the JCB, and I learned this from a great friend of mine, John Flynn, 20-something plus years ago. And we talked about the JCB. And again, for the JCB, in case somebody are not familiar, JCB is like a mechanical digger. Okay, here in Ireland, JCB is a company, if you like, it's a brand. So you're using the JCB, and it's a big mechanical digger, right? Or a bulldozer, in some cases, people might recognize it as. But when you think about the JCB, and what I want people to do is write down the word JCB as in J, and then below it C, and then B below that. Just write down the words JCB. And ask yourself, if you're judging yourself, which is the J, based on what you see as failure, how is that serving you? Maybe you're consistently criticizing yourself, which is the C, around what you haven't achieved compared to somebody else. And then when you haven't achieved it, and somebody, again, when you give your power away to other people, and our society, or somebody reminds you of what you haven't achieved, maybe you start blaming yourself. I could have done better, should have done better. Maybe I should have put more effort in. Maybe all this, you start playing the blame game. That's the B, blame. Now, if you imagine right now, Pete, right, you're sitting there, and you're sitting in your office. You have a couple of young kids, right? Imagine giving them the key of a JCB and turning it on and letting them have fun. How much of your property do you think can be left at the end of it? Right? Complete chaos, right?
Total chaos. Total.
Yeah, so everything just gets demolished and destroyed. So many people are driving that JCB around inside themselves because of the fear of failure, because of their recognition of failure as being something negative. And when they're recognizing failure and they're judging themselves or criticizing or blaming themselves, then they're going to be driving that JCB. And imagine the damage that you're doing to yourself when you're judging, criticizing, or blaming. So we got to let go of the judgment, criticism, and the blame, and just accept it for what it is. Learning. And that's what failure is. It's part of your process of learning, and it's part of your journey.
Is failure only possible with comparison? Because assuming from just what you said, to judge something, you generally need to benchmark it against something, good, bad, and different. Criticizing, same thing. It's got to be compared to something. Dreams, expectations, what the neighbor did, what someone else did. And then blaming is either a shortfall or an overshot against what you were expecting. So it always has to be a comparable, right? Or does it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, how else can you keep score? Because most people, by the way, are keeping score on failure. Right? Imagine the scoreboard. It's amazing how many people don't chalk up their successes, but they'll chalk up those failures all day long. And so maybe it's a comparison. And you're comparing yourself to what? Sometimes we often hear people, I've often heard people talk about their life and, giving out about their life and say, really, how bad is it? And they tell you how bad it is. And you say, well, compared to what? And it doesn't matter what challenges you're overcoming, what failures you might have experienced, there's always somebody worse. So what are you comparing yourself to? Those who feel successful can only compare themselves to how unsuccessful other people might be. Otherwise, how do they measure it? How do they keep score? So you can only measure failure or measure success by comparison, in my opinion. You've got to compare it to something, right? So when you're doing this, but the other side of that, once you're doing that, again, if you're back driving that JCB, you've got to turn off the engine and throw away the key. But whatever you do, make sure you throw it away far enough that nobody else can pick it up and turn it on. Don't give those keys to somebody else. And usually that's what happens for most people. That fear again of what people think about him if it won't work out. So therefore they're giving the key of that JCB to somebody else. Now I know most people have met people who judge, criticize, and blame. They pass their opinions on other people. And it's funny, most of these people are people who haven't achieved much anyway. Yet people compare themselves and feel like failures based on the judgment or the criticism or blame from other people who haven't achieved anything like they want to achieve. Now, does that sound crazy? But we are emotional beings, right? So we feel it, and that's the reality. And when I think about that JCB, I remember a quote, and I'm sure you guys have heard it before, but I remember getting this poem. Somebody gave me the copy of this poem many years ago. And all I kept thinking was success is failure turned inside out. And if you could count the amount of times that I played that over and over in my head, particularly the times when I was going through challenges, realize that success is failure turned inside out. And it comes from a fantastic poem called Don't Quit. I'm happy to read it for you, just to remind you. But when things go wrong, and they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to smile but you have to sigh, when care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Life is queer with its twists and turns, and every one of us sometimes learns. And many a fellow turns about when he might have won had he stuck it out. Don't give up though the pace seems slow, you may succeed with another blow. Often the goal is nearer than it seems to a faint and faltering man. Often the struggler has given up when he might have captured the victor's cup. And he learned too late, when the night came down, how close he was to the golden crown. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint in a cloud of doubt. And when you never can tell how close you are, it may be near when it seems afar. So stick to the fight when your heart is hit. It's when things seem worse that you must not quit. I can't remember, or I've never found out who the true author of that is. But that poem has resonated with me so many times. But in particular, that one line: success is failure turned inside out, a silver tint in the clouds of doubt. And anytime I had doubt, anytime I felt challenged, anytime I felt like, am I failing? Failure is part of the learning. I got to turn it around. I got to turn it inside out. If it's not working, I got to turn it inside out. And that's my primary focus all the time. And that's what I'm going to suggest, that you recognize it as success if you just turn it inside out. It's the polar opposite, right? We spoke about polarities quite a while back too. So we got to see it in here and understand that this is what we do to play our part. Like everybody who tries anything fails at some time or another, and each of our failures have something valuable to teach us. Now, but unless you can swallow your pride or get rid of the ego and pay attention to these lessons, as Michael Jordan, you're all familiar with Michael Jordan's story. Again, Thomas Edison, we mentioned, or James Dyson. Most people don't know that James Dyson almost became bankrupt and almost lost everything. But unless you do as they did, you will fail to learn anything at all from failure. And that, in my opinion, is the greatest failure of all. So you got to allow yourself to keep paying attention and find a value in failure.
It's funny you say, because it reminded me when you were speaking there of there's a book, Black Box Thinking by Matthew Said.
Well, there you go. That's one I don't have.
What's the theory being? It is the black box on the airplane. That's essentially it. But they were sort of saying the airline industry is one of the few industries, if in fact possibly the only one, that not celebrates, but welcomes incidents. So I believe if you're a pilot and you automatically get indemnity if you report an incident within a certain time period. The point being, no matter what, it could be someone tripping over on the ground or something in the air. So they welcome a potential incident or failure or whatever it is so that they can investigate it. They welcome it, bring it on, turn it inside out, upside down, and decide and basically consciously look at it. As opposed to, I suppose, if you compare it, and he does in the book, he compares it to the health industry, when you get death rates, you get trends, you get things like that, and it's the reverse. It's hidden, bad for statistics. There's somebody that's failed, right? Sack them, get them out quickly. We've taken as a core, how many companies do that? We were failing or something was going wrong, right? Sack the man at the top or woman at the top and get fresh blood in. And you kind of going, the person who's there is probably the most qualified because they've just failed.
Absolutely. And that's, well, listen, the one thing I will say though, Pete, if a flight is going to fail, please let it not be the one I'm on, okay? But you're right. I mean, when you start looking at it and understanding that, I mean, when you talk about the healthcare system, you talk about what goes on there and the hiding the failures. I mean, isn't that not a failure to mankind, right? In itself, that behavior and what it does and the outcomes that it creates and the changes it makes in people's lives and creates in people's lives. That to me is the true failure, is not recognizing it. And the problem is with that is they will continue to go on and make mistakes, right? They will continue to go on and fail people and fail their staff and fail their team and fail society and fail the world or whatever, by continuing to do that, by not recognizing it. So, and this to me is something that I'm a big believer in. And I remember many years ago when, my company, and I set up a customer satisfaction report. And within that satisfaction report, we used to get the managers to bring them in and we sit down and go through them. And, some of the managers, the guys who were particularly looking after some clients who were getting really good, fantastic feedback, were really thrilled. But I wasn't looking for that. I was looking for anyone that somebody was dissatisfied. Because for me, if I didn't find what was an area where, thankfully, not too many were dissatisfied, I have to admit, but there's always going to be clashes of personalities or different things, or people's expectations may not be what they are not being met based on a miscommunication in a way sometimes. So for me, I always wanted to discover, okay, well, what's actually in here that's not working? Where are we failing? Where are we letting people down? Because if I didn't identify that, then I was failing my company. I was failing, the people who work for me. I was failing the families of the people who work for me, because if it meant that we were losing contracts, we could potentially have to let people go. Right? So there's such a knock-on effect to not recognizing what's failing. But there's only failure if you don't do something about it. So when I would look at these, I only would look at if there was a bad comment or a negative comment. That's all I was really interested in. And with that, I had introduced what I called a room for improvement form. So that was immediately attached to that. And we went out and we talked to the client and said, listen, we've seen there's some areas you've been dissatisfied with. Let's figure how we can improve this to make this better, that you're satisfied. Sometimes we let the client go because we realized our expectation would have created failure on our behalf too. So it wasn't, so that happens from time to time. But for the 99.999% of the time, we built the relationship and we fixed something and we got better, and we consistently got better We consistently raise standards and set standards in our industry just by understanding where we could potentially fail or where we may have been failing according to somebody else. So that information was invaluable to us, which I will say honestly, seriously contributed to a lot of my successes. And without them, how could I know I was successful? By the bank account? Oh, there's so much more to that. So much more to life than the bank account. The bank balance doesn't determine your level of success. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have it, by the way. A good one, that is, or a really good one, if you like. But the reality is what determines your success is how you're growing, how you're consistently growing and learning from those failures and how you embrace them. And it's like no matter what, you guys obviously at this stage, I'm a serious rugby fan, and I've seen it there, and I've worked with teams, and I've listened to teams, and I've listened to talks after the matches, and what do they do? Always they say we learn from what we've done wrong, we learn from the mistakes we made, we learn from the errors. Each game is each next game is the next game. That's all we focus on is the next one. How can we improve it? How can we get better? Sure, we made some mistakes out there. Sure, things didn't work out. We may be dissatisfied. We may be upset with each other or upset with our performance today, but we'll build on it. And that's what the best teams do. They build on it. So the importance of recognizing failing is what it is. And understanding why failure is so important sometimes. How else do we know what we've done? How else can we realize what we've achieved? And most people have achieved so much in life. And those achievements come from your learnings. But not only that, you have the ability to pass it on. Imagine having that knowledge to save somebody else that pain and that challenge and that heartache. They'll have their own, but having that ability to pass it on, to help them go through it, support them going through it. By sharing your experiences of what it was like to fail. Now, again, I'm not going to suggest that people live their whole life focused on their failures. That's not what we're about. But we have to welcome them as part of the journey to keep moving forward in the direction of your desired outcomes or the life of fulfillment, whatever that means to you. But in my opinion, honestly, if you don't swallow your pride, pay attention to the lessons, if you fail to learn anything at all from your failures, again, in my opinion, that is the greatest failure of all. Because you can still be, do, and have anything. You have the power, the capability, and the ability to do anything. And sometimes we learn. And then sometimes we win. But it's all part of the same journey. So we've got to keep focused on what we can learn from the failures. Because when you understand, when you do not get the results that you intended, you've got to focus on the experience objectively and be persistent in discovering every bit of insight that you can. And I assure you this, if you apply that insight in the future, then you will be a success and you will have learned how to fail to succeed. Whatever that means to you. People say to me, well, how do you start this journey? What do you do? You got to find people who can lead the way. People who've made some of these mistakes previously who can guide you and keep you motivated because failure is so recognized. It's difficult for most people to keep going, right? So for me, this is why I will always have a coach or a mentor. I'll find somebody who can motivate me, inspire me to be better than I can be always. And then also, I will learn and be inspired by the successful failures of my idols. And I'll keep trying harder. But I'm going to show you, I won't give up. And I'm going to encourage you, you don't give up. that you find your way and you will be inspired. But remember what I'm going to say here, by the successful failures of your idols, the people who you look up to, the people in your industry who seem to have achieved everything that you want to achieve. Well, they've left you some clues. They share how they've overcome the challenges or failures or part of the failing on that journey. Pay attention to them. They're the people you want to listen to. But ultimately, you are still the one in control. You are the person who can control your outcomes. And no matter what goes on, it's entirely down to how you look at it, whether it determines what's a failure or a success. You any questions, Pete?
There's a couple of reflections. I suppose one is, and we talk about, we talk about that light bulb invention, and that sort of the 10,000 failures or the 9,900 and whatever it is failures until and I suppose it's almost saying to people, it's like when you're halfway down that journey, as a lot of people are, that they're sort of working on their passion, their thing, and they feel like they're banging the head off the wall. And I'm sure, people are sort of saying it can't be done, or just let it go, or don't be crazy, or whatever. People are almost inviting failure. You're saying enough, just, how far do you need to go?
Yeah.
And yet, as soon as they do it once.
I remember many, many, many years ago, God, I was down in Kerry. And then, of course, this is going to sound like a Kerryman joke, but it's not, right? And we stopped looking for directions. And there was this chap at the side where he said, go on there. He said, dead straight for about 3 miles. And the guy said to him, are there no bends in the road? Right? And but the truth was, it was in the general direction, but we had to take a few turns. And we realized, in the frustration, we just asked the wrong person for the right directions. Right? So therefore, we asked the wrong person for the right directions with an expectation that that's what we were going to get. But I can tell you we were disappointed because we didn't get what we asked for. We got directions, but not the ones we wanted. And for most people, when they're looking at those failures, you say, when people are giving them direction, then, our people keep telling you that, they'll recognize that so many people have failed in this area or failed at what you're trying to do, etc. Well, then I would find out who it is they're talking about, and I would go and study and research them because they have went this journey before. The people who talk about it, and will share this with you, have never went this journey. How can they possibly give you the right directions? How can they guide you in the direction you need to go when they've never went this journey before? Now, I would rather talk to the man, not the man at the start of the road, right? You imagine somebody at the beginning of the road who can sit on the wall at the beginning of the road and keep meeting people on the way back and picking up their stories. So every person who comes to the beginning of the road shares that same story with them. And he tells them, listen, you're the 32nd person now to go down this road, and nobody has got to the end yet. And create all that mindset of failure and fear. And for most people, they set off down that road and with an expectation of failure. Guess what happens? They'll come back. Now, if I go to the beginning of that road and somebody says to me, listen, before you go down that road, you're the 32nd person. And I said, really? Were you down the road? And if they weren't, I'll say, okay, can you give me the numbers of the 31 people before me and the names of the 31 people before me so I can go and reach out to them? And I would go and reach out to them and ask them what happened, what went wrong. What would you do differently, knowing what you know? And set about doing that. And that, to me, is the road to success. And sometimes you're just going to have to go down the road. You might not be able to find it. You're going to go down the road and experience it for yourself. Either way, you have to experience it for yourself. And Cantor's law states that middles can look very difficult. Everything in the middle can look like a failure. So you're traveling a road you never went before. Of course, it's going to look like a failure. How can you recognize as anything else when you come across a challenge? And of course, you come across challenges because you've never been there before. You come to a crossroads every now and again and wonder, which way do I go? Do I go right or left? And rightly or wrongly, you make a decision. If you go left when you should have went right, okay, you get so far down that road and you realize you made the wrong choice. Now you can choose to say, well, I'll make my way back to the start again and I'll sit up there on that wall with that guy and I'll tell everybody my story and why they shouldn't go down the road. Or you can get back on track and you can, maybe it's a longer journey sometimes, but the experience is worth it. And you go back to that crossroads and this time you choose right. Sometimes you will fail hard, sometimes you fail easy, but you should always fail forward, right?
That's, to me, as you're speaking there, it's like that is the definition in my mind, I suppose, of a mentor. It's somebody that can sit with mature reflection, that can sit back and go, okay, that was maybe perceived as a failure at that time, but can take the strength of perceived failure, because that, the energy around failure can be very, very personal, very, very deep. But if you can invert that power from a negative to a positive, which a mentor hopefully has been through, that's the definition, is it not?
Absolutely. Something that just springs to mind there. We've a mutual friend and a client of mine who is an exceptional mentor herself, is a lady called Karen Newton. And Karen Newton is a wealth coach. And I remember being at a talk and Karen was speaking at an event with me, and I listened to people as she shared her story, and she talks about going from zero to millionaire. And it wasn't an easy journey. It was a tough journey. And it took 4 to 5 years to get there. And as she shares her story, she said to people, you can do this in 4 to 5 years, but it takes a bit of work. I remember somebody thinking, somebody talking, saying, do I really want to do all of that for the next 4 to 5 years to reach millionaire status, if you like? If that's what's important to people, some people it is. But this person said, I don't think I could do that. Yet they were prepared to go back to their job and spend the next 45 years working in the same job for 45 years in the hope that they might have 50,000 left for a pension at the end of the lifespan. And I thought, why? What creates that train of thought? And the train of thought was the fear of failure based on what other people think again. And what if it doesn't work out? Well, look, I think it's worth a shot. It's only 4 or 5 years in comparison to 45. And what if I don't reach it in 4 or 5? Then, okay, you just go back and you take a different route. You go down a different road. You will make mistakes. You will have challenges. Well, you might get there in 7 or 8 years then. But it's worth it. But it depends on what it means to you. And what it means to you may not actually be the same as being there and achieving that result, if that makes sense. Was having done a talk recently about Croagh Patrick in County Mayo. I remember climbing Croagh Patrick. And by the way, there were hundreds of thousands of people have done it before me. But it meant something to me. And it probably meant something different to me than it meant to anybody else. The goal was achieved, but it's done now. So all you can do is go back down. Right? What's next, But it was an achievement for me and something that I felt. And I had my own personal experience of that. And that to me was a very successful day. Well, some other people think that's not a big deal. I've climbed Mount Everest, and that's okay. That's okay. So, you gotta ask yourself, what are you prepared to put in here? What are you prepared to do? And what does it mean to you? And that's all that matters, really. And along the way, there will be challenges. On halfway up Croagh Patrick, from an old injury, my knee swelled up like a balloon full of fluid. And I thought, oh, will I turn back? I said, no, I'll just take my time. Took me a lot longer to get up there than I had anticipated. It could have been easier to turn back. But I didn't. And I have to say, great group of people that came with us. And I met one of them on the way down, and he stopped and said, "Right, come on, let's go. We'll go back up together." And he came back up to the peak with me. And you know what? I've learned a lot. I can tell you, the next time I go to Kirkpatrick, I will be better prepared. If there is a next time, that is. But I'd be better prepared based on the things that didn't work, not necessarily on the things that did work. You prepare yourself better because of the things that haven't worked. So just keep going. Just keep going. That's the most important part here. And accept that failing is part of success. But you don't have to become a failure.
In the eyes of a law, depending, I forget which way around it is. So you're generally innocent until proven guilty. I think typically with health and safety, you're guilty until proven innocent. And I'm just wondering, essentially, are we all failures until we prove ourselves successful?
Okay. I think we're all successful, actually. I believe that everybody is successful. Everybody has begun successfully in life. And but I think people keep stepping up their game. And it's amazing because even, I think it comes down to people actually really finding their true selves on the journey. Because when you start out again, you're going into school on a pass fail system. This is conditioned. This is what you're being educated to believe to be the truth. And when people believe that it's a pass or fail, then that's when they feel like a failure. It's back to that belief system again. And maybe it's a belief that's enforced on you or conditioned to believe to be the truth when it's not. So for me, I believe everybody is successful. I mean, I've yet to meet a baby, brand new baby, that has never made me smile. So they're very successful at making you smile. I've yet to meet a brand new baby who doesn't make me feel good. So we know they're quite successful from the moment they're born then. But successful at what? We can't be successful at everything. Or can you? Depending on what it means to you. So it's entirely down to your opinion. What is everything? What is everything? And isn't it amazing that for the majority of people, that they begin life like that, a little bit carefree until they get taught about pass and fail systems in life, business, school, relationships. And they start to come back judging themselves based on those lessons that are usually taught by somebody else and the expectation of failing or passing. There is no one or the other in some cases, according to what most people make people believe. And then eventually they go through life failing. And in my opinion, to eventually get where they started. Happiness. To get to be happy by achieving things that they wanted to achieve and how it makes them feel. So when we start looking at people's lives and judge themselves on failure, because most people judge themselves on failure, very few people judge themselves on success. Right? And if they do that, then are you living an unfulfilled life? Till eventually you go back to where you started. And I know it's ironic because most people, right? There are a few grumpy old ones out there for sure, right? But most older people I meet love to share stories. They love to have time with people and share happiness, which is exactly how they started out coming into the world, right? So that fear of failure, that recognition of failure, instead of being part of the journey of success, in my opinion, makes people unhappy. But if you just recognize it as part of the journey on your journey to success, you can choose to be happy on the process. I'm probably talking in like a tongue twister or like the Riddler at this stage. I don't know, but but for me, if I fail at something, it's a great opportunity just to do something else, learn something new. How do I fix it? How do I improve it? What can I do? What have I learned? I take the feedback from every failure. It's not always easy. Sometimes it might take a little bit longer to accept it, to say, okay, I have to go back here and figure out what can I do. Sometimes it's instantaneous. Just depends on where we're at that particular time. But I can tell you, I will always look at any failure as how could I have done it differently? How could I do it better? How can I apply it now? And what can I do with it right now? Therefore, then it's not a failure. So we have to welcome it as part of our education and our experience. And ironically, here I am going to mention Donny O'Callaghan again, as we seem to do most of these calls. Because what I will say, what I learned from that man is part of this journey. And that's what it is. It's a journey. Life is an experience, right? And when we start looking at, education, don't confuse education with a pass-fail system, that you have to be educated and have qualifications in certain areas. Not that I have any issue with them, because I have met some incredibly educated people in all aspects of life. But give me an intelligent man any day. And Donny was probably one of the most intelligent men I've ever met. And that intelligence came from researching the failures, how to improve them, how to change it, what to tweak, how to move on to the next step, and having the ability to share them and translating. That, to me, intelligence is far greater than education, in my opinion. But that just because it suits me. So that's not a judgment on anybody else. So be an intelligent person. We all are, by the way. We're intelligent beings. Just some people choose differently. And if you're being intelligent, then and you surround yourself with intelligent people will find a way forward. They will share successes. They will share how they overcome failures. They will think differently. They think strategically. They think critically. And they will recognize failures for what they are, feedback. And then they will apply the knowledge that comes from that. And that's what's making real change. That's what's creating the success. So accept them, recognize them, but don't live with them. Right? Don't live with the failures.
And you can compound it, just as you're speaking there, it's seeing what is perceived as a failure. But then on top of that, then is the failure to act, and not really compounded, right?
Yeah, it's not.
Failed to act, failed to choose, failed to move forward. There you go.
We have a habit of doing that, Pete. Yeah, but but you can. You're right. I mean, look, it's, you see, the more you do it, the more you're going to recognize it. The more you recognize it, the more you do it. The more you do it, the more you recognize it. The more you recognize it, the more you do it, right? And all of a sudden it mounts up. And this is why, when I say recognize it, identify it, but don't live with it. Right? So again, what's the lesson here? What changes can I make? And what changes am I going to make? And then get involved, make them. And you've got to keep trying, by the way. You've got to keep trying. It doesn't matter. Try something. Do something. And then failure is just part of the lessons. It's part of life. It's part of your journey. That's all it is. Recognize it for what it is. Don't give it the energy. Don't let it encompass who you are and everything. Just recognize it and welcome it and say, yeah, what can I learn here? What can I change?
You'll know this. The poem there was good thing, bad thing, who knows? The farmer who owned the horse and had the son.
Go ahead, share it with us, Pete.
It'll take a minute or so, but I'll read it out. I just have it here because, again, I'm just reflecting on something you said. So one day so there was once a farmer who owned a horse and had a son. One day his horse ran away. The neighbors came to express their concern. "Oh, that's too bad. How are you going to work the fields now?" The farmer replied, "Good thing, bad thing, who knows?" In a few days, his horse came back and brought another horse with her. Now the neighbors were glad. Oh, how lucky. Now you can do twice as much work as before. The farmer replied, good thing, bad thing, who knows. The next day, the farmer's son fell off the new horse and broke his leg. The neighbors were concerned again. Now that he's incapacitated, he can't help around. That's too bad. The farmer replied, good thing, bad thing, who knows. Soon the news came that war had broken out and that all young men were required to join the army. The villagers were sad because they knew that many of the young men will not come back. The farmer's son could not be drafted because he had a broken leg. His neighbors were envious. How lucky. You get to keep your only son. The farmer replied, good thing, bad thing, who knows. The source is, it's Eastern Judgment. It's a way back there, but just as you're speaking, it's an incident.
Yeah.
It's our perception is what we choose it to be.
And we don't know what's coming. We don't know. I mean, we could look back in life and say, somebody asked me one time, what do I regret not doing? And I thought about it for a while, and I thought, okay, the two things that I really loved, right? And I love music, right? But I can't play an instrument. And I had often said, I'd love to play the guitar. And I chose work. It's a long story, but I did. I chose work over it because I was a workaholic, right? So I never took the time to learn how to play the guitar. The other thing I loved was rugby. I just loved it. I would have played it 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I often look back and go, had I stuck with it, there's a good chance I would have went somewhere. There's a good chance. Even though I know I was up against so many other people in the game, I still know that I was good enough. And so you could look back and go, I regret not staying the course when it comes to rugby or learning how to play the guitar, those two things. And then when I reflect on it, I thought, well, if I did play rugby, I would have taken a completely different path than I've taken today. Completely different path. And who knows where I'd be? Maybe I'd be here doing what I'm doing. Maybe I wouldn't. Who knows? But this journey that I'm on began very early in life for me. Now, back then, I couldn't have told you where it was going. But now I know. Now I have a little bit more clarity. But who knows in another year or two where it's going to go? But I'm open to that. The other thing is, when I think about playing the guitar, I mean, I love a good sing song, right? And we had our own bar in Lanzarote. And I could have played the guitar. I paid for musicians to come in and play at night when I could have played myself in my own bar and build up atmosphere. But then I also think, well, if that happened and I went down that route, would I be just in some place like Lanzarote or someplace else playing gigs every night from bar to bar? I'm not saying that's a bad life either, by the way, but it's not the life that I choose knowing what I know now. So we could go any road we want. It could be good, it could be bad, who knows, right? But sometimes you got to trust. And if you trust and you learn, this is the key here is learning from all of those failures, all those things that may not have seemed to work out. I've had some massive failures, massive things that didn't work in my favor. And I remember that feeling of devastation, that feeling of like, what am I going to do? Until I sit in quiet reflection and look back and go, okay, that's what it is. It is what it is. This is where I'm at. What can I do now? Absolutely love doing what I do. I live and breathe what I do, and I love it. And some of those great losses or failures, if you like, that I would have seen as failures were just things I had to let go of and learn from to move into where I am today, to do what I'm doing today, and be 100% committed to it. So who knows? Who knows? You can take every story, every instance, every failure, and turn it into something positive. Everything. As long as you see the way, and it's for me, part of my journey, I believe I have an obligation to do what I do. To help people move beyond those failures. Change their lives for the better. Not that it has to change very much, but allow you to become successful at whatever it is you want to become successful at.
Just think, I mean, in a prior life, I suppose for me, and even you think of athletes, you think of Formula One and all that. I mean, they're chasing the 1%, they're chasing the 0.1%, and my prior life, and as I suppose everyone is really, we're in information overload, we're opportunity overload. But there was a principle there that you manage by exception. So you take that everything that should be working is working within parameters. So you manage only the things that weren't. So I'm sort of carefully saying it's by exception. It's not a failure per se. But if you can tweak, same as a Formula One, same with I suppose an athlete, you'll pay a coach X amount to bring a very tiny percentage difference, right? But that's the difference potentially between winning and failing. There you go. Even though winning and failing, that's the difference, right?
Well, absolutely, because I mean, the real failure there is when you recognize that you don't do anything about it. And like interestingly, you talk about sport, and again, I'll go back to rugby, right? Because of course I have to go back to rugby. But I remember having a conversation with a great rugby coach, a guy called Alan Gaffney. Alan was the coach in Munster in Ireland as well. But I remember having a chat with him. I was talking about where he was at and how did he get the team to shift that little bit more. And he said, look, he said, I've been around the world, he said, right? And he said, I look at it like my business as well, and I treat my business. He had a large real estate business. And he said, when I look at the game of rugby, he said, right, we look at the stats. Now you look at any sport now, any sporting event now, consistently throughout the game, you're going to see stats, right? He said, and in particular in the history of Irish rugby, okay, in the history of Irish rugby, going back pre the late 90s or the noughties, if you like, Ireland and in Munster, by the way, in particular, were winning games for 60 minutes. For most of the games, they were ahead. They were winning for 60 minutes, and they lost the game in the last 20. And when Alan explained this to me, he said, "No, he said, look, coming from my coaching background, he said, we got to say, what's the game plan? We got to figure out what the game plan is." He said, and most people have to go and create a game plan, a complete game plan. So he said, for the majority of coaches, you're sitting there creating a game plan for 80 minutes. But for me, he said, I knew we were playing exceptional rugby for 60 minutes. So I'm only creating a 20-minute game plan. How can we improve those 20 minutes? Where are we letting ourselves down? He said, that was my primary focus. How many times did we get 5 yards on the line, and why did we not get over the line? I want to know, why did we not get over the line? What can we do to improve that? How many times did we get into that 22? How can we improve it that we get in there more often in the last 20 minutes? Because that's what was winning the game, the last minutes. And the game was won by inches. If you're familiar with the game of rugby, if you watch, every time the ball goes to ground and there's a ruck and there's a regroup, go again, and they're putting at it phase after phase after phase, inch by inch by inch by inch. That's what wins the game. But you got to discover what goes wrong in that part of the game that you're not winning it. And this is, to me, what a great mentor does. To find out what part of the game you're playing exceptional in, and fix the things that we're learning from the failures winning the part that you're not.
So you play to the whistle, and the whistle is when you're being lowered into the ground.
100%. So I'm going to share, I think, unless you have other questions, we'll get ready to wrap up.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Right, well then, I'm going to share 2 quotes with you to finish up today, right? And one is from an Og Mandino. And his quote says, "Welcome every morning with a smile. Look on the new day as another special gift from your creator, another golden opportunity to complete what you were unable to finish yesterday. Be a self-starter. Let your first hour set the time of success and positive action that is certain to echo through your entire day. Today will never happen again. So don't waste it with a false start or no start at all. You are not born to fail. And the last quote is from Wayne Dyer. It says, live today. Remove all blame from your vocabulary. Catch yourself when you find yourself using your past history as a reason for your failure to act today. And instead say, I am free now to detach myself from what I used to be. Have an absolutely outstanding day.
Pat, thank you so much.
Thank you, Pete.